All right, let's get started. Today we're heading down south, way down south to Antarctica.
Brr, pad your parka.
Definitely. We're going deep on a report about climate change in Antarctica.
It's a pretty weighty topic.
It is, but it's super important. We're talking Antarctic climate change and the environment.
A lot of science packed in there.
For sure. But don't worry, we're going to break it down and make it easy to understand.
Yeah, we'll make sure you come away with the key takeaways.
Absolutely. So before we get lost in the ice, what's the big picture here?
Well, the report makes it crystal clear.
Okay, lay it on me.
Human activity is causing global warming.
Not a big surprise there, unfortunately.
Right. But Antarctica is feeling the heat, literally.
Oh, I bet. How bad is it down there?
Well, the Antarctic Peninsula is one of the fastest warming places on the planet.
Wow, seriously.
Yeah, some areas are seeing over zero point 0.2 degrees C warming per decade.
Per decade. Since when?
Since 1981.
That's much faster than the global average.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that kind of warming has huge implications.
Okay, so I get that it's warming really fast, but how does that affect me, sitting here in listener's location?
Well, imagine Earth's air conditioner breaking down on a hot summer day.
Oof, not a good picture.
Right. And that's kind of what's happening with Antarctica.
It's like our planet's cooling system.
Exactly. And as it warms, it's losing its ability to regulate our climate.
And that affects weather patterns everywhere.
You got it. The Southern Ocean, which surrounds Antarctica, has absorbed a crazy amount of heat.
How much are we talking?
Something like 75% of the excess heat generated by human activities since 1870.
75%. So basically the ocean is taking one for the team.
Pretty much. But absorbing all that heat has consequences. We're seeing changes in ocean currents.
Those currents are pretty important, right?
They act like a giant conveyor belt distributing heat around the globe.
So what happens if they change?
Well, disrupting that system could dramatically alter weather patterns worldwide.
Meaning, give me some examples.
More extreme events like droughts, floods, even the intensity of storms could be affected. Yikes. Okay, that's not good. And then there's the whole rising sea levels thing, right?
That's a big one.
How exactly does melting ice in Antarctica affect sea levels?
The Antarctic ice sheet holds a massive amount of frozen water.
Yeah, it's huge.
As it melts, it contributes directly to global sea level rise.
Okay, makes sense. Is some of it more vulnerable than others?
Yeah, the western part of the ice sheet is particularly vulnerable.
What makes it so vulnerable?
Think of it like a giant ice cube sitting on a tilted table.
I'm picturing it.
It melts slowly at first, but if it reaches a tipping point,
Tipping point. Doesn't sound good.
it can collapse rapidly.
So that's where those terms MSI and MICI come in.
You got it.
Those are a mouthful. What do they mean again?
So MICI stands for Marine Ice Sheet Instability.
Right.
It describes how warmer ocean water is eating away at the base of the ice sheet.
Making it unstable.
Exactly. And then there's MICI.
Marine ice cliff instability.
Right. MICI explains how tall ice cliffs, those exposed by the melting, become prone to collapsing.
Yep. It's not a good situation.
Makes sense, but it's kind of scary. And that makes this report even more important.
Definitely. It's a call to action.
So what can we do?
Well, obviously reducing emissions is key.
Right, that's a given.
But the report also highlights the need for adaptation measures.
What kind of adaptation?
For coastal communities, it could mean reinforcing infrastructure,
Makes sense.
developing early warning systems for floods,
Okay, to be prepared.
and even considering managed retreat from the most vulnerable areas.
Managed retreat.
Yeah, basically moving people and infrastructure away from high-risk areas.
I can see why that would be controversial.
Definitely. But sometimes it's the best option.
Tough choices.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've covered the ice, the ocean, and the scary tipping points.
We've laid the groundwork.
But what about the air? What's happening with the atmosphere around Antarctica?
Well, it's changing too. Remember those crazy high temperatures in East Antarctica back in March 2022?
Yeah, those were wild.
Right. Concordia Station, usually incredibly cold.
Yeah.
Experienced temperatures 38.5 degrees C above normal.
Whoa, that's a massive swing.
It was mind-blowing.
What caused that?
Well, it was a perfect storm, you could say, of factors. Greenhouse gases, obviously.
Of course.
But also unusual wind patterns and even influences from the tropics.
Wow, it's all connected.
Exactly. And that makes predicting the future even more challenging.
So we've got the atmosphere, the ocean, the ice.
The whole shebang.
But what about the creatures that actually live there? How are the penguins, the seals, the whales?
Yeah.
How are they handling all this change?
That's where it gets really interesting. And that's what we'll dive into next.
All right, let's talk about life on the ice. So, Antarctica, not exactly a tropical paradise.
No, definitely not. But you'd be surprised by the amount of life that thrives down there.
It's pretty incredible when you think about it. All those penguins, seals, whales surviving in those harsh conditions.
Right. But all this climate change we've been talking about,
Yep.
it's putting a lot of pressure on these amazing ecosystems.
This report breaks down all the different types of ecosystems, right?
Yep. From the open ocean to the seafloor, even the land.
Where do you want to start?
Let's start small with krill.
Krill, those tiny little shrimp things.
Yeah, those guys. They might be small, but they are essential.
I've heard they're like the bottom of the food chain down there.
They're a keystone species, yeah.
What does that even mean?
It means they play a crucial role in the entire food web.
Okay, so like everybody eats krill.
Pretty much.
Hmm.
Everything from fish to penguins to whales depend on krill for survival.
Wow. So what happens to them when the ocean warms and the sea ice melts?
Well, less sea ice means less algae for the krill to feed on.
Oh, so it's like a domino effect.
Exactly. And that can lead to a decline in their populations.
And then everything else that relies on them starts to suffer.
Right. The report specifically highlights the plight of the emperor penguin.
Those guys are pretty iconic.
Right. But they rely heavily on sea ice for breeding and foraging.
What happens as the sea ice disappears?
Well, their breeding grounds shrink, and they have a harder time finding food.
It's kind of heartbreaking. I mean, those penguins already endure such harsh conditions.
It's tough.
Oh.
And it's not just penguins. Changes in sea ice also affect seals.
Oh, yeah. Seals need ice too, right? For what?
They rely on stable ice platforms for giving birth and raising their pups.
Makes sense.
So yeah, it's a whole chain reaction.
Okay, so we've talked about the open ocean, but what about what's happening on the seafloor?
The benthic zone.
Benthic zone, right.
It's a whole other world down there. Incredibly diverse, but also facing a ton of threats from climate change.
Like what kinds of threats?
Well, warming waters are a big one.
Okay, yeah.
Ocean acidification.
We talked about that before, right?
Yeah, but it's a huge problem for creatures with calcium carbonate skeletons.
Like corals and stuff.
Yeah, corals, certain sponges.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it harder for them to build and maintain their structures.
So how does that work exactly?
Think of it like trying to build a house with bricks that are constantly dissolving.
Oof, not a very good foundation.
Exactly.
So it's like a chemical attack they can't really defend against?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And then there's another possibility the report brings up.
I'm kind of scared to ask.
Well, as the waters warm, certain species might expand their ranges southward.
Southward. So like from warmer waters to...
To Antarctica.
What kind of species are we talking about?
Well, the report specifically mentions crabs.
Crabs in Antarctica. I didn't think they could handle the cold.
Traditionally, no.
So what's changing?
As the ocean warms, it creates opportunities for them to move into new areas.
So what's the big deal about crabs moving in?
Well, think about it. Many creatures on the Antarctic seafloor have never had to deal with shell-crushing predators like crabs.
They've just been chilling, minding their own business.
Right. And if crabs were to establish themselves there, it could totally change the balance of the ecosystem.
It's like introducing a big bad bully to the playground.
Exactly.
The poor little critters wouldn't stand a chance.
Yeah, it's a reminder that climate change isn't just about warming temperatures.
Right.
It's about disrupting these delicate balances in ways that are hard to predict.
So we've covered the ocean from top to bottom.
The pelagic and the benthic.
Yes. Very good.
But there's still more.
What else is there?
We got to talk about the land.
The land. But it's mostly ice, right?
True, but there's still life to be found there.
Like what?
Mosses, lichens, tiny invertebrates, and of course the penguins and seals that come ashore to breed.
Oh, right. I always forget about that.
Yeah, it's easy to overlook.
So those land ecosystems are obviously connected to the ocean. What's happening to them with all this change?
Well, as glaciers retreat, they're creating more ice-free areas.
Wow.
Yeah, but that changes things. The availability of fresh water changes, plant communities shift.
So it's not necessarily a good thing.
Right. And it can even impact the breeding success of those penguins and seals we were talking about.
So basically, everything's connected and everything's being affected.
That's the gist of it. And to make matters worse,
Oh, there's more.
there's the growing threat of invasive species.
Invasive species in Antarctica.
Yeah, it's becoming a real problem.
How are they even getting there? It's not like they can just walk across the ice.
Mostly it's through human activity.
We're to blame again.
Well, things like ships can carry seeds or tiny organisms in their ballast water.
And then they just dump them out when they get to Antarctica.
Essentially, yeah. As more people visit and work in Antarctica, The risk of introducing these non-native species increases.
So it's like a double whammy.
Right. Climate change is making the environment more hospitable to invaders.
And then we're giving them a ride there.
It's not a good combo.
So what can we do about it?
The report stresses the need for strict biosecurity measures.
Like what?
Cleaning equipment carefully, inspecting cargo for hitchhikers.
Sounds like a lot of work.
It is, but it's crucial to protect these fragile ecosystems.
Okay, so we're messing things up on land and in the water. Is there anything that's not being affected by all this?
Not really. It's all connected. And that brings us to a really important question.
What's that?
Can anything we do actually make a difference?
It's easy to feel hopeless when faced with all these huge problems.
I get it. But the report actually offers some hope. It stresses that the future of Antarctica, and really the whole planet,
Yeah.
it depends on the choices we make today.
Okay, so we've been talking about all these changes happening in Antarctica, and it's a lot to take in.
It is. It can feel overwhelming.
Yeah. Like, is there any hope?
Well, that's the good news.
No.
There is. The report really emphasizes that.
Okay, that's good to hear.
It's not too late to make a difference. The future of Antarctica, the
Yeah.
whole planet, really.
Yeah.
It depends on the choices we make right now.
So what can we do? I mean, it feels like such a huge problem. What can one person really do?
I get it. It can feel daunting,
It does.
but even small actions can add up.
Okay, so like what kinds of things?
The report talks a lot about reducing our carbon footprint.
Right, like being more eco-conscious in our daily lives.
Exactly. Things like driving less, using less energy at home, being mindful of what we buy.
Okay, those are things everyone can do.
Right. And then there's the bigger picture stuff.
Like what?
Supporting policies that promote renewable energy, for example.
So getting involved politically.
Yeah, voting for candidates who prioritize climate action, advocating for change.
Making our voices heard.
Exactly. And supporting scientific research. That's a big one.
Right, those scientists are the ones on the front lines, figuring out what's happening and what we can do.
Absolutely. The report stresses how important it is to fund Antarctic research and monitoring.
So they can keep gathering data and understanding how things are changing.
Exactly. And then that information needs to be used to make decisions, create policies.
Right, so it's not just about collecting data, it's about using it to make a difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where those environmental organizations come in.
You mean like the ones that are fighting for the planet?
Yeah. They play a crucial role in translating science into action.
So donating to those organizations, volunteering?
Exactly.
Okay, so there's a lot we can do, even if it feels small.
There is. And don't underestimate the power of just talking about it.
You mean spreading the word?
Yeah, raising awareness is huge. The more people understand what's happening in Antarctica,
The more they'll care about protecting it.
exactly. We can all be ambassadors for Antarctica.
I love that.
Share what you've learned, talk to your friends and family.
Inspire others to care.
That's what it's all about.
So this deep dive has been pretty eye-opening.
It's a complex issue.
It is, but it's also incredibly important.
It is. What happens in Antarctica affects us all.
Well said. And this report makes it clear that we need to act now.
There's no time to waste.
So what's the final takeaway? What do you want listeners to remember?
That Antarctica is a bellwether for the planet. It's like a canary in a coal mine.
Okay, I get that. It's an early warning system.
Exactly. And what's happening there should be a wake-up call for all of us
To take action, to make changes.
to protect this incredible place and our planet as a whole.
Well, I think that's a great place to end. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise.
It's been my pleasure.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Antarctic climate change. We hope you learned something new and feel inspired to take action. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
'28 year. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.